Hi there, this is Pierre Sabak, and today we're going to be speaking to Philip Kinsella, and we're going to be dealing with his first book, A Passage Through Eternity. Now, this is a very interesting book from my perspective because it deals with an abductee, but it also deals with his perspective in terms of the actual phenomenon, what we're actually dealing with. And I think it's interesting because there's also a psychic component. And I think that's really the first question which I want to deal with. I'm writing a book at the moment about folklore, and within folklore there seems to be a connection between second sight and seeing fairies. So do you think that there's a connection there between, let's say, your abilities as a medium or a psychic and your ability to actually communicate, interact? Do you think aliens are interested in that dimension?
Oh yes, most definitely.
Right.
I believe one of the biggest things, the chunk of ufology is missing, and that is to do with consciousness, with the psyche.
Yeah.
And within the early years of my interest in UFOs, as it were, and that's been ongoing for about 40 years, since
Yeah.
I was about 11. But I generally do agree with you, Pierre, that there is a link. And I believe that consciousness has a lot to do with this because our understanding of the workings of the human brain in terms of consciousness is little understood. And I believe that a lot of people who are sensitive or psychic, for want of a better word, a word that most people don't like, are able to attune themselves as instruments to these unseen dimensions, or perhaps such entities are able to interlink with us. So it's a valid question, most definitely, especially with folklore as well. That's interesting.
Yeah, because I'm very interested. From your perspective, you trained as a medium. Now, as a child, you also had experiences prior to training as a medium. So it was obviously, to me, that whatever we're dealing with was very interested in you and also perhaps your brother. I'm actually very interested. Has your brother had similar types of experiences, or has it been mainly centered upon yourself? And if it's been centered more upon yourself, do you have any interpretations or reasons why that might be? I'm speaking here as an identical twin, so I'm kind of very interested in this answer.
I understand. Well, my interest in the phenomena increased when my brother and I had been witness to what we call the silver eye that came over to us as kids and our grandmother, our maternal grandmother. My brother has had what we would call an abduction, but much earlier than I. And he's documented this within his works, although they weren't the typical greys or that are so commonly reported. But the beings that took him were clad heavily in a lot of medical equipment and wearing masks. So I don't think it was me being singled out. I think, and I don't believe that it's because we're twins that makes us, because we're all unique. But my experience later in 1989 heralded a complete shift round. The psychic phenomena came much later. But I guess I'd always had that ability because my grandmother, my maternal grandmother, was psychic. So drawing the parallels between being psychic or sensitive and these things coming in, there must be a connection somewhere. But I do know that the abduction that I had, or we call abduction, because I wanted to examine this very carefully.
Okay,
I'm not one of these individuals who proclaims everything without first looking into it. And the experience in 1989 was horrific. And in those days, I'm sure you're aware, Pierre, we didn't have internet or it was very basic, and we didn't have any mobile phones to connect with people, so it was very hard to reach out to people. But that was the mark, the 1989 abduction in the winter.
Can I ask you a question about this? Because obviously what you were saying was very horrific, and I want to go into a moment. But straight after what had occurred to you, how did you know that something remarkable had happened, and did you think that this was not human? So you were very sure about that?
Oh, definitely, and without question, because when you're, out in the back garden, my grandparents used to live in a 3-story high house in Feltham in Middlesex. My Uncle Bob had built it next to the other big house that they owned previously to that. And we were out there this beautiful summer evening. And this silver orb, we're talking about 1982, 83. When you're a kid, you don't record the experiences like we do now, like I do with everything now. So we were young, and this silver orb had come through broad daylight. There was no wind. We thought, first of all, it was a balloon, but it came closer, and it seemed to operate mechanically and with precision. And it came first over to the tree and then hung over our grandmother's head. And it's the most bizarrest thing that I'd ever seen in my twin ever in our life, because it seemed to defy gravity. There were no markings on it. There was no sound. There was nothing. It was, my brother called it the eye. My grandmother, strangely, didn't seem at all fazed by it. That's very bizarre. But to us, we were really quite shocked. And I guess that kind of magic, that feeling you get of magic, seems to come in. And it felt like you wanted it because it was so strange. It looked heavy or weighty, whatever it was. And after a while, when we wanted to have a really good close look at it, and Grandma was going to get the binoculars, even though you'd be able to see much in the binoculars because it was that close, it started to move towards the windows to their house, as though looking through the windows, went over the top of the house, and we ran in and went to the other side of the house to watch it disappear in the distance. And I remembered my grandmother was on the phone in the hall talking to some family members about it, and it was a shock. It was something that you after all these years, it's never left me, and it never will leave me. And of course, we didn't have drones in those days, and it wasn't a Chinese lantern. It was solid. It was very much structured in its appearance, but there were no markings on it. So it's just like a silver ball. And one person tried to trick me once in an interview and said to me, "Oh, well, you mean it was the size of a tennis ball?" No, it was the size of a football.
Yeah, that's ridiculous.
You don't have to forget.
Yeah. I'm very interested. Do you think that was actually monitoring you in some way, or do you think it was just, yes?
Yeah.
Okay, that would...
I have no proof of that, but
no.
You get a feeling, and I'm very coy with my feelings, but my brother and I, my twins called it the eye. We knew that it was watching us, it was aware of us, and this is not the first time, not with us, but someone else in our family had reported a glowing orb that had come over the fence, and this is my cousin's husband who's a manager of an oil rig. And had seen this. So I think my brother calls them the eye, and he makes parallels to them with regards to what the old Second World War fighters saw, the Foo Fighters.
Yeah, the Foo Fighters.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very interesting that your brother calls them the eye, because in the ancient depictions of the Ophanim wheels are depicted with eyes, which represent the watchers. So that kind of fits in within the symbolic and the occult symbolism. So that was one of your first experiences, was with the eye. Was there any experiences predating that, or was that the first one which really resonated and which you really recalled?
Yes, there had been, although some more times than not, I haven't documented all of them because they would not appear as spectacular as the main events that happened that I've recorded. But we used to live on the property of Bignell House when we were children. My mother used to clean the mansion that belonged to Dr. Thomas Gregory and his wife Marge, and he was a brilliant eye surgeon. And Bignell House was in Chesterton, big mansion. Twiggy used to own it some years ago. And of course, we were allowed to use the property, the tennis courts, the swimming pool. It was a huge place, and there was a wood by it. And I remembered on one occasion, the place was haunted, and I knew it was designed and created by the descendants of Sir Francis Drake. And I knew something had happened to me there because I kept having a reoccurring dream, which I've explained, but the stones that I kept seeing, found myself in this dream with these, in this circle of stones, and there was a broken tower in the middle. And in my dream, I had to work out each stone, to get to each stone in a particular way for me to gain entry into the building in the middle. And after these recurring dreams had stopped, I drew it and I showed my mother this. And I said, "Do you know where this is?" And she said, "Yes, this is the ruins that was part of Bignor House in a field that I used to take you through every morning." And there had been another disturbing element which occurred where my brother and I, we were only young, and there was, my mother was pushing my younger sister in a pram, and I think my mother had been with my Aunt Denise, and my brother and I looked above in the forested area, because you could walk for quite some distance, no one being around, and there was this most horrid thing that was swinging backwards and forwards in the top of the trees, and it looked like a bear with a grotesque face. And that did scare my brother and I, but we didn't really put a connection to it until years later, and we still can't. So that was another incident, but I'm sure that place was haunted, and so. But that was the beginning of the start of these strange experiences. At the time, you don't record them.
Yeah, I've got a question here, and that's in relation to hauntings. It does seem like that in terms of portal activity, that sometimes when entities go through portals, that sometimes that there can be almost like a shadow, or that ghosts or apparitions from the past can also accompany these strange kind of distortions. Do you have any interpretations upon that at all?
Yes, I do. I have a feeling that you're absolutely correct, Pierre, because in our research with regards to UFOs, they seem to break or open some type of portal. And it's possible, theoretically speaking, that where they've come from, they've left a rift or an opening for other spectres or creatures to come through. Are they part of the same phenomena, i.e. are the Yeti linked with UFOs? No, I don't think so. But they're seen more times than not, along with the little folk, if we go back into ancient mythology, and we find this reoccurring theme of, people experiencing these strange creatures, Black Panthers and all sorts of Yetis. And so I believe that maybe the space that's been opened or compromised, not necessarily through UFO contact, but some areas of the earth are like dimensional gateways or portals where these energies can come in. And that is that does interest me greatly with regards to that. But most of my research has been linked into ufology and also the Greys, trying to establish where they come from, what they are, why they're here. But certainly this isn't just one aspect of the phenomena. We are looking at many different connections that most people do not wish to look at. And I think it's important that we look at the phenomena, not pigeonhole it into like UFOs, a spaceship coming from another planet, or Yeti is a creature that's been around for eons and is still walking. There are connections, there are links to this phenomena, which I believe will answer more questions into this mystery.
Right, yeah, because certainly in folklore, and certainly within early traditions from the mid-1600s onwards, this type of phenomenon was referred to as a pararelli, and these were almost like psychic apparitions, and they were often connected to what seems like portals and to fairies and folklore. Yeah. Before we move on to the subject of the Greys and this main event, which occurred, I think it was in 1989, I'd like to first of all talk about your connection to shamanic practices. Now, I found something very interesting in your book. You said that you had a spirit guide which was named The Wolf Song. Now, I found that very interesting from my own perspective, because I had an experience with a shining being, and this shining being impressed, well, shall we say, a dog or the signifier. I don't really want to go into the experience too much, but just that the being impressed upon me a dog or a canine. And I know that in the Ed Waters case, when he saw a flying saucer, that suddenly he saw lots of different images and pictures of dogs. Now, from my study, I'm led to believe that this is a signifier of the dog star, and I'm very interested in your perspective in terms of your spirit guide who yeah, so do you want to talk about that, and is that something separate, or is that something very closely interrelated to what we're dealing with?
Well, I believe we're all special, we're all unique, and I believe that we have our own paths. But what happened was that I had gone to see a medium, a brilliant medium, who used to work for the FBI in America. She used to work on cold soul cases where the FBI couldn't find bodies. They'd bring her in. She had an 85% success rate, so much so that when she was here in England, because she was British, she was half a mile away from where the body of Sarah Payne was found. Remember the young girl?
Yeah, I remember.
Many years ago? The young girl. Now, I went to go and see her after my grandmother had passed over, because my grandmother had come to me just prior to her passing. You see, my grandparents had moved then to Somerset, and that's where they spent the rest of their lives. And we are here in Kempston in Bedfordshire. And we couldn't be with her because it was so far away. We had just been to see her. And one night I started to cry, and I just saw a vision of her in my head, of her holding my brother and myself in her arms, and that's the photograph we have. And then she chastised me by saying quite loudly, "Why are you crying? Why are you crying?" Well, 10 minutes later the phone rang and she had passed over. I then went to go and see a medium, and because I'd never seen one before, and I was quite dubious about them. I'm quite hard, I'm ashamed to say. And she literally blew me away. And she said to me that you're psychic, and I tried to deny it. She said, "Oh no," she said, "you'll be doing psychic work." She said, and she said also to me that you have a spirit guide, a North American Indian. And I thought, oh, here we go. That if it's, you know, has to be a North American Indian or something. Well, anyway, obviously those on the other side had the last laugh. She did mention about the UFO connection link. She was very specific about that. She told me that I'd been abducted and that she knew, this was way after 1989, because the spiritual part happened later, or the connection with clairvoyance. And she knew. So I kind of like, she wanted me to stay and to come back and work with her. She said, you know, you've been this, you've been that in past lives, and you've walked with Christ. And, you know, she knew what page of the book that I was on regarding Edgar Cayce at the time, page 92. And so I started to meditate and thought, well, if I've got a discarnate entity that's a spirit guide, I want proof from him. So I remembered I was in the sitting room meditating, saying, "So what's your name? I want to know what your name is."
Yeah.
And I immediately was impressed with these images of wolves and a North American Indian playing a flute. And I thought, oh, that's how you communicate, because I was expecting them to talk. Wolf song, wolf song, wolf song. If that's your name, prove it to me. Next day at work, I'm at work, and this guy comes up, and I serve him as retail, and I'm looking at his T-shirt. He's wearing this leather jacket, and he probably thought I was very strange looking at his chest. But on his T-shirt was a picture of North American Indian and wolves, and a North American Indian was playing a flute. I remembered I served the gentleman. He said something. He was very nice, saying, "You've got to go to Canada, man. It's great there." And I took myself from the stockroom and thought, my God Almighty, I've had a sign, and these signs kept happening. Yeah. So I then began to realize that as human beings, we're more than flesh and blood. I guess I've always known that, but the proof was astounding that I had a discarnate entity called a spirit guide named Wolfsong, who was helping me then with my spiritual work. But this then later on led into other areas of revelation. So most people will laugh and joke and say, "Oh, you know, the way that it's spirit guides, he's got a screw loose." But my argument has always been that when you're doing a reading for someone, it's the evidence is there. And Pearl, then I went back to see Pearl after some more people died, and I saw a friend of mine who died of cancer through the conservatory glass doors as clearly as I see myself in the mirror. And then I went back, and then it was a rigorous training for 7 years, and I'm still learning, but you know, I can see how people put this into pigeonholes and that they don't understand. And you know, anyone can claim anything, but it has to be the proof within discarnate communication is through evidence. And that's something that she kept pounding on me. So Wolfsong was very strong. And in fact, I went over to some friend's house once, an older couple, and they were friends of mine. We used to sit and talk about UFOs all night and spiritual stuff. Yeah. And they had bought me a present, and it wasn't my birthday. They didn't know what I was getting involved in with regards to the spiritual aspect. And they brought this present out and unwrapped it. And it's a statue of a North American Indian with a wolf on its head. Wow. And I still have the statue.
Wow, that's very interesting. As what you were saying, that we are souls, and souls do reincarnate, and
Oh
we
yeah.
have separate incarnations. In my own work, I refer to this as a soul pattern. So I think that that's a very interesting. I want to now go to what was probably your main and very defining. And again, are you comfortable with the word abduction, or do you prefer a different word in terms?
No, that's fine. The abduction is fine. They call it that. At the time, I didn't know what it was, but that's fine. Yeah.
Yeah, so can we talk about that? Are you feeling? Do you feel comfortable about talking about it? Because it's very harrowing reading about it
Yeah.
in your book.
It's a bit long-winded, but what occurred in the winter of 1989 was something I will never forget, and I still to this day try and get my head around. I'd come back from work. I worked in Bedford. At that time, I didn't drive because we lived in a village, a small village there, Marston Mortain. And we lived in a small cul-de-sac, and my brother and I shared a room downstairs. We had this huge room that's like a bedroom stroke study, and it had a shower room next to it. And I loved it. I mean, it was quite a big property. So I'd gone to work, and I used to travel by walk up the mile or so to Millbrook Station, which is an old rickety old station. There's no one there. You just stand there waiting for the train. On my return from work in the winter, I got in the door. So it must have been about 7:10, I think, or around about that time. But it was winter, and I walked up the drive, got into the house. Our dog was there. So there was my brother, my sister, and our dog Benji. Yes, the dog. I was, people laughed on TV about that, but part of your family. So I'd gone in through the hall, and where the hall is, it's all glass. So as you go up to the drive, there's the glass hall. You can see through to it's all frosted, but you can see it's all glass, into the kitchen. And we were just talking, and there was only us three and our dog in the house, and we were just talking about what happened the day, as you do when you've come back from work, and you unwind a little bit. And then the atmosphere started to change. It was very bizarre. It was like an electrical current. The only way I can explain it is that it felt heavy. And the dog, Benji, started to react. It started to growl slightly. And this feeling intensified. And then all of a sudden, it got really stronger. And my brother went into a trance. Now, my brother was in front of me, so he couldn't see the hall where I could, because I was right in the kitchen stroke diner. Door was open, could look into the hall and to the frosted glass where the front door was, and our study was in that side there.
When your brother went into a trance, was he completely out and unconscious, or did he remember this but was frozen?
No, he doesn't remember. He literally he stood still and lifted his head up, and then he opened his mouth and he said, "There's going to be an earthquake, or Grandma's going to die." Well, there was no earthquake, and our maternal grandmother was still very much alive at the time. And then all of a sudden, there came a light that came up from the driveway that lit the frosted glass doors to the front door. And I thought a car had come up, and I thought my mum had come back from work early or had finished her shift early. She was doing nights then. And this light intensified, and as it intensified, the dog started to go really mad. And then the glass seemed to move backwards and forwards as though something was compromising its structure. The only way I can explain it to you is like a cartoon. Like in a cartoon when you get something, they bend like jelly, glass like jelly. And this small being, about 3 foot tall, with all clad in black, with a large motorcycle on its head, or it looked to me like a helmet that was bigger than proportion to its body, came through it and then ran through to our downstairs study bedroom. And then the door went back to normal, and the dog was going mad, and I was so stunned. My brother had then come out of this trance that I said, "There's an intruder in the house," and then my mind was a blank. I don't think people can fully appreciate what goes on through your mind when this happens, but it was the darndest thing I'd ever seen in my life. And I shouted, "There's an intruder in the house," and I reached behind to get the biggest knife I could find. And we went in search of it, and we couldn't. And it ran across from there quickly up the stairs in split seconds and disappeared. Well, that was it. I was beside myself. We searched the house. Explaining it in words, but the experience itself was something very different, I can assure you.
And that this was supernatural, or was you thinking just purely in physical terms at this point?
Well, I realized at this point that it was not human. And I think the fear of that, later on that night, I broke down because I didn't understand what happened. My mind was working out, we weren't that far from St. Mary's Church. And I thought perhaps it could be a ley line or something of this nature, although I never checked that out. In those days it was hard to find out, these things. But it certainly upset me, and I tried to rationalize, but I couldn't. There was nothing until the early hours of the morning. That's when the major part of it happened, where I then found myself in the hall where this thing had appeared, laying on my back and being forcibly moved through the walls and doors to the house. So basically the bedroom study door, and then seeing myself being dragged on my back about 3 foot off the floor again, through the conservatory glass doors, through to the conservatory and out the back. And that, I was paralyzed. I couldn't move, but I was aware. Now, I've had people say to me, "Oh, you had an out-of-body experience, or it was a vivid dream." No, it wasn't, because after the experience, I came back with physical marks. So I'm pulled out into the conservatory, and I'm arched upwards, and in the sky are hundreds of UFOs, and it's almost like a revelation, like, oh my God, they're real, they're here. They really exist. I'm not a mad person after all. The things that we've seen, the major one with our grandmother then. And there was one of these crafts that was stationary, and I was pulled up, like, when you're on a roller coaster and you go down that dip, but I was being lifted upwards. I remember coming closer and closer to it, and I blacked out. And then when I awoke, I was disorientated. I was very hot. And I was naked. I was on a bed, strapped, legs strapped, the arms strapped. My neck wasn't, so I could move my neck. And disorientation to confusion to where the hell am I? And this is the part that's embarrassing, because I suffered on national television, and I got a lot of ridicule with regards to this. But then you find out later on that when you've done your research, you find that most guys have had this happen to them through what we call an abduction. So I'm laying there, I'm hot as hell, I don't know where I am, and it's very dark, it's dingy, and it's like a sauna. And when I look around, I then realize that there's something inside of me, and I can feel it in the lower abdominal part, but I then realize that it's in the actual lower, and it's been inserted into the lower part of the anatomy, but it felt organic inside the lower part of the bowel. And when I turned to my right, there were 3 reptilians. I've never been interested in them in my life, but they were very tall, they were very dark, and they were in a kind of like a more denser mist, but they were shuffling from side to side in this very strange, I don't know what it was, gait, or whatever you want to call it. So horrified, I started to scream, because I got something in me. I'm naked, I'm in this room, I don't know where I am, what's happened, and I feel violated. So I screamed and I yelled, and no matter how hard I screamed, these creatures had no empathy. Nothing. It was like you're a slab of meat. And then what happened then was that after my shouting and yelling, I was exhausted. This cream-coloured grey, it was the same as what we would consider a grey, although at that point I've never really seen one at close range, I suppose you'd say, but it came up, and the mechanisms were released, and the item at the bottom was retracted, because I could see this metal bit of tubing going down, and these guys had gone. I don't know where they'd gone. They disappeared, and I was ordered to dress. It was a cold command, but I was grateful to the what we call the grey for getting me out of this, and I had to follow it down this corridor straight ahead, and it was still a bit steamy, but there were lights. I could see the lights, and we came to a wall. And we stopped, and I'm looking at this thing, and it's looking at me, and I'm thinking, well, what do I do now? And all of a sudden, the wall disappeared to create an opening, and I could see that we were at such a height from the village, and it was now getting lighter. So it must have been the very early hours in the morning. And I remember looking out, and there was another. This is the really weird part. There was another craft hovering by our conservatory and a huge pond. And the grey looked at me and wanted me out. And I'm like, what do you mean out? You don't expect me to jump. And it was just so cold. It's like, you know, go. We don't want you here now. And there were two other greys that came with me as we came down. And I wasn't to look back at the greys. I was to look at the ship, but towards the ground. And this is also another horrifying part, but I think helped me with my research in years to come. So as we're coming down to the ground, and I'm violated, I'm angry, I'm really peeved.
Sure.
And these greys go, and there's this other figure standing in front of me. And I think to myself, my God, I've just been through that. Now I've got another one of these things in front of me. But this one was different. This was probably about 4 foot tall, very muscular built, the same as a grey, but his face was more angular, and his eyes weren't so big, but he was angry. He wore this pointed hat that was a silly, stupid pointed hat. He wore a one-piece uniform and khaki uniform, and he wore these knee-length boots, but his arms are folded like this, and he's really looking at me, really angry. So I'm at this point, I'm thinking, I'm not having a very good time here. I don't know what the hell this thing is, why I'm here. But he seemed familiar to me. But the feeling that I got from him was that he was really angry with me, and it affected the solar plexus, what I now understand is the solar plexus. And I'm standing there thinking, why are you angry with me? I've just ostensibly been raped.
Yeah.
And you've taken me through something I don't understand. And you're standing there with your arms folded looking at me. I wanted to punch him. Now, I thought, I need something from him. I need to know, because I knew, for some reason, I knew I wouldn't be here long. And I thought, I got it. How on earth, how the hell am I able to pass through locked and bolted doors? How can I do that? And I thought, if he could tell me, I have the answer. But he looked shocked. And it's like seeing animated plastic moving. And he started to speak, and he lifted his head up, and this electronic Ross came out. And I found myself then moving very quickly or crashing through the doors, and then through to my room, and bang, I'm back in my body. In my body. This is the part people so you did in my body. And as soon as I awoke, my nose started to bleed. I found it difficult going to the loo. And also I had, we discovered 3 triangular marks on my right ear and 3 marks that I still have on this arm here. And they burned, but we tried to take photographs with the old Polaroid camera. It never came out. Right. And the nosebleeds were an embarrassment for some time. So that, in a nutshell, was the major experience in 1989. A harrowing. People, you know, I get kind of like mixed feelings with it, because it's something that has never left me. I can't remember what I did a couple of days ago, but that is something I remembered as clear as day in every graphic detail. And that is something that will never leave me.
Yeah, I'll just add a couple of points there. I know from my own research that in terms of probes which go inside of men, that what appears to be happening is that they're putting an electric current into the prostate in order to make the individual ejaculate. Yeah. So that's one thing, and I think that's very interesting, because you don't actually find that within female cases. I haven't come across a case that happening to a woman. So again, that's a data point which I think is interesting. Now, you said it was almost like snap and you was back in your body. So yeah. So did this happen at a spiritual level, at an ethereal level, or was it everything all combined together?
I think it was everything, and I also believe that it was a soul level, and this, as I said, this led into later research and a discovery that opened a new dimensional aspect to this. Because I always thought that if you look at the Betty and Barney Hill case, they remembered the physical part to the experience, but the other parts came in dream state. And it's interesting, isn't it, how they kind of like take you away from the your what we would call the conscious awareness of this world, and able to bring you into their level of reality. And I think once you're in their level of reality, you are at their mercy. There is nothing you can do. Whereas when I was in the kitchen, there were a number of things I could have done. I had been in control at that point, far from the fear. But when they had abducted me, that was when I had found myself powerless. And I realized then that the Greys, want of a better word, of how they to initiate this. It's a political piece of work, but we have to look at all aspects, even if I may be wrong, and that aspect is changing. But certainly there's a soul aspect, and also with regards to the Greys and their so-called hybridization program, which I was interested in. So it's kind of like opened up a lot of I didn't see it there and then. I didn't have all the answers there and then. I didn't see all that then. I had to try and put the pieces together. But I remembered reading a UFO book some years later, and I can't remember who had written it, but there was an illustration of two Swedish skiers, and they had come across a being that was not that dissimilar to what I call Noddy, the one in the garden, the one with the top, the pointed out. But the one they saw was smaller, yet identical. Mind you, mine wasn't carrying a box, which this one was. So I thought, well, how can they see it and then I see more or less the same thing? Yeah. What's going on here? So they're able to screw around with our psychology, I think.
Yeah, are you aware of the Wallerton case? Because this was 6 children saw what was said to be pixies in circular cars or bubble cars, and they were wearing noddy hats, and that kind of made me think about your case in terms of folklore and how pixies often have certain types of headgear such as pointy hats. So I thought that was an interesting point of comparison.
Well, Noddy used to scare me, you see, Enid Blyton's Noddy, the character that they did on TV of him. Right. So I don't know whether or not they impressed an image of this.
Yeah.
Because seeing animated plastic moving kind of scared me.
You see, Noddy was always my favourite character. I was obsessed about Noddy. So, yeah. Now, you mentioned about the breeding program. Do you think it is about breeding, or do you think it's much more fundamental to the soul itself and to the soul pattern and how that interrelates to this? Because my understanding of this is that the physical and the spiritual are profoundly interconnected, and I actually think that they're much more interested in the spiritual level, but you see the spiritual level manifests at the physical, so we tend to look at it more in physical terms. But because we're dealing here, and I use the term a holographic culture because they've deconstructed the mechanics of waveform reality, and again, so we make these separations where they don't necessarily make those type of separations as what we would in terms of the physical and the spiritual. Now, I think that they can go not only into, they can break or breach into the imaginal realm, which is the spiritual realm. My understanding of this is that this spiritual realm is the realm of universal ideas, of universal forms, and these forms are then materialized physically. And so the spiritual realm is the imaginal realm. And they've deconstructed, not only have they deconstructed waveform duality or quantum physics, but they've also deconstructed this imaginal realm, and they can go into the dream realm, which is the spiritual realm, and they can therefore intersect. And this is why they often appear in the biblical traditions. For example, the Elohim, the high ones, are described as the Elokeh, which is a high creature, but are also referred to as the Ruach Elohim, the high spirits, because they are one and the same. They've deconstructed, they can dematerialize themselves. And so this is, I think, important to understand. Now, I was kind of interested in, when you were in your book, you were talking about auras and fields and how the aura can actually store past life memories. And again, for most people don't have access to their past life memories, which would suggest that in some way, when one is incarnated, that the aura is often compromised. Do you think that there is an agenda by these entities to compromise the aura in some way in order to stop us from remembering? Because remembrance is about gnosis and leads into actually accessing the soul pattern and being in control of one's incarnation. Do you think that they're messing with the auric field in some way?
Yes. By the way, your book is brilliant, and you go into a lot of detail, and you've done your research, your homework. So I applaud you for that. brilliant research.
Well, it took me 8 years to put together.
Yeah, well, it's well worth it. I mean, that's one of the things I have to say to you, that you're a brilliant researcher and your work is wonderful. The Greys, the only thing that I was made aware of with regards to them at the time came as a flash of inspiration, and that gave me part of the puzzle. It was about us being physical, spiritual beings that incarnate and reincarnate, and that through our sojourn on the earth plane we build memories. We can't remember the ones from the previous worlds that we had come from, because if we did, we'd end up in mental institutes, and there is a reason why we forget, or we go through a process of sleeping until we pass over to the other side and all memories are reunited again. I call it the awakening. Now, what interested me about the Greys was, one, what they were and how they did it. What are they after? So I know that, they are blank. They're like a blank canvas. They have no understanding, as far as I'm aware, of many other, of empathy, of love, of taste, of smell, of aging. Now, I don't just base my theories on what I'm going to say here. I'm very open-minded with all aspects, because we have to be. But one of the things is to do with the soul, because we are a productive species. We reproduce. So my query was, if the Greys cannot themselves reproduce, why are they interested in a program of reproduction? And they found us as containers for that reproduction, of what they call hybridization. So us as sentient beings, as souls, my understanding is that when we finish this journey here, there is a full awareness of our spiritual heritage. There is an afterlife, there is another side. The mechanics or process of what happens after that, I have no idea. I have seen the other side once, but I didn't go the full journey. That's when we lived in South Africa when I was very young, and I nearly drowned. But one of the things that the Greys are not able to do is to reproduce. And it kind of got me thinking, well, why are they interested in the hybridization program? Why are they intent in creating hybrids, using male sperm and, of course, the human females as their incubators, to create a new genus? Because it wouldn't make any sense if they were an intelligent species coming from another galaxy that would, ostensibly mate or go through a program of mating or creating a new species through us.
Yeah.
So I thought, well, if the Greys had cloned themselves, maybe they had gone through some form of spiritual devolution. For instance, if I cloned you 100 times, you as the original copy, and coming through the said channel of birth, the birthing cycle, will go back to the other side. The question is, your clones that will have one single memory, one single imprint of one single physical life, it's that connection, that spark will only have that one memory. And when that physical copy of your clone dies, I don't feel that it's strong enough to get back to where you've come from, because you're the original blueprint.
Yeah.
So if the Greys had done this on a massive scale, it's possible or conceivable that from their dimension they'd brought themselves together as a one hive mind consciousness, and being able to pierce this realm quite strongly as that mind, to try to recreate themselves through the said hybridization program. So I know that there are different theories that I have with regards to that, but I believe that, when we're trying to put things in boxes, I know that I met the esteemed Dr. David Jacobs in Arizona when I'd been over there to a UFO conference, and I respect his research. I respect every researcher, because none of us know, but he believes that they are here now, and I don't doubt that.
Yeah.
And that they want to take over the world. But my theory leads into a more
esoteric.
Yeah. And the auric energy field is very important, because as spiritual beings, our souls, our aura, our energy, the soul carries its own signature. And I believe that these beings, Greys, want of a better word, are attracted to these energy signatures in individuals. And I believe that some people, they send out their signaling quite blatantly, quite obviously, whereas most other people are quite happy, God love them, to just remain on a lower level of conscious awareness. Whereas people who are lifting themselves from a soul level, these spectres come in, we're like light bulbs to them. And there is a possibility that's how they connect with us, or they're able to find their way through to us through the auric energy field. Because this whole spaceman theme, I was like, well, I know that with Betty and Barney Hill, and that actually happened. Kathleen Marden's been very kind and very good to me and my twin brother, and our uncle and aunt did experience something. And we've got to remember there are different factions of greys. But certainly I agree with you, Pierre, that these greys are far more very clever, very deceptive. And I did think, well, are they our creators? Did they create us? But then I'm thinking, well, why would they create so much pain for us? Why would they come and abduct us and do all that they do?
I think from the occult tradition, and this is only from my perspective and my understanding, is that there was a proto-human. This is known in the occult tradition as the anthropos. And so they took the occult human and they tweaked the proto-human to create the Adamic man. Now, the Adamic man is obviously created to survive on planet Earth, but also the Adamic man is created so that the DNA can be combined with both the seraphim, which are these non-human entities, and also the cherubim, which are these proto-human angels or proto-human entities. So that's my understanding of that. I think what you were talking about in terms of consciousness is very interesting, because I've got a childhood friend, and he was a genius. He got the highest grade in A-level at mathematics, and in his mid-20s he started to have experiences with beings which he described as angelic. And I find that now he was medicated, because that's often what occurs, that within psychiatry they don't accept this phenomenon, so they just tend to medicate people. But I think it's very interesting that when you look at geniuses like Socrates, who had his own Agatha daemon, and you also look at Jung as well, he spoke to angels, Carl Gustav Jung, the psychoanalyst, and again his understanding of psychoanalytical theory was informed by this entity called Philemon. Now, Philemon taught Jung everything which he didn't know, both in terms of the spirit but also with the mind. So when you look at human culture, there is this relationship between the development of ideas, ideology, human psychology, and I think they're very interested within human psychology. I also think it's very interesting that in your book you make this connection between meditation and the amplification of consciousness. And so therefore, once you begin to deconstruct and look at this phenomenon, then it takes an interest within you. And this is certainly found within the Arabian traditions of the jinn. So for examples, within Saudi Arabia, they'll use euphemistic names not to refer to the jinn in order not to attract that attention. And that's also found within English folklore as well. So referring to the blessed ones rather than referring to the fairies in order to avoid the gaze of these entities. So again, I think it all goes back to consciousness. Now, we're coming to an end to this first part of the interview. Is there anything which you would like to add in terms of experiences, or any final points which you feel that the audience needs in order to get a very clear picture about your book, A Passage Through Eternity?
Well, I think that all of researchers, I've always respected my peers and those people, Pierre, who have their own opinions about ufology and other aspects connected with it. I think what's exciting is that we're looking outside the box, because we've been contained in a very tight box.
Yeah.
And I think now that we've been able to expand and broaden our horizons with regards to the human psychic consciousness and the afterlife and history, that's what I'm looking into now. The conscious, back into the ancient, and even further back. And this tells us a lot of what we may be dealing with on a conscious, an empirical conscious level of understanding. But certainly, I wrote A Passage Through Eternity, the Enigma of the Dead, UFOs and Aliens, in an effort to try to help me also understand what we may be dealing with, because we don't have the answers. But I think it's fascinating to speculate. And as I said, although I have my research and my outline, doesn't mean to say that I don't embrace anyone else's. I fully respect that, and I've made mention to that. So, enjoy being on the show. Thank you.
I think that that's a very good point actually to finish with, because I certainly feel that within British ufology, what we actually need is consolidation, and we need to work together, not in terms of pulling apart people's ideas and theories, but we have a lot of data and a lot of people have very interesting ideas, and we need to be coming together and discussing these ideas in a mature, in a sensible, and in a very sober manner. So I'm completely with you there. I would definitely recommend your book, and I've got it here. I'll just show the audience, A Passage Through Eternity. Your brother did the illustrations for the book, and that was very good, and I really liked those illustrations because I come from a fine art background myself. What I also liked about the book is your emphasis on consciousness, and I think that this is now beginning to breach through within modern ufology. People have just right now, researchers are making this connection with consciousness. And so I think it's absolutely fascinating that you bring in all these different strands, both in terms of ghosts, psychic awareness, you've got a shamanic component, but then you've also got more traditional elements, which I found within traditional ufology. And you're very skillful in terms of how you can pull all this together. And it seems it's very coherent and it's very well put together. So I really enjoyed that book.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you again.